This is On the Play Games with a breakdown of the Durham, North Carolina Planetary Qualifier review. In this video, we'll be looking at the top played leaders, the most played leader in base combinations, how those decks did when it comes to converting to a top 8. We will also compare 2 of the top 8 Sabine ECL lists to my 15th place Sabine ECL. My Sabine ECL list took a Game 3 loss in the final round of Swiss, losing to a Han ECL. This knocked me out of the top 8, but did keep me in the top 16. So not upset at all about that performance. I feel pretty good about that. So we want to take a look at the differences, though, between the decks that did make it in the Sabine ECL lists and the choices that those players made that may have given them an edge compared to my Sabine ECL. We will also correct some of the reporting by Atomic Empire Game Shop made on the Han lists. I noticed that. And then we're going to take a look at some of my final thoughts towards the end, the prize support, and the way that the event was run. So with that said, let's take a look at the overall leaders that were in the meta. We had an event of 111 players, which is a very sizable planetary qualifier, especially when you look at some of the European qualifiers. Some of them are firing as low as 40 players. At the same time that this event was going on in Virginia Beach, there was a planetary qualifier that only had 80 players. So there are some issues, I think, that might be solved in player turnout for these planetary qualifiers if we take a little closer look at some of the prizing that is offered by these shops. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But right here in our chart, we can take a look and see that Sabine was the most played leader in the field. And this is a little bit of a flip-flop from what we have seen in the past, where Han has been the most played leader and also seen the most played, most top 8 and conversions and first place wins over Sabine. So it's very interesting, just like when Greenville last year, all of a sudden Ray Tarkentown took over when everybody was so worried about Boba Fett. And the boys in the South, we don't play by the same rules, evidently. Also, you can see that Han Solo was the second most played leader, but that wedge is actually almost completely evenly split. There's only one deck difference, we'll see that here in a second, between Han Green, which they have listed as Han Green 30 base, but at least 2 of the Han Green decks that I saw were ECL, and that's one of the corrections we want to make sure that we point out for the Atomic Game team when they put out these pie charts. After that, you see Palpatine did a really great job. We made top 8. We have two different versions of a Palpatine that made the top 8. So Palpatine did really great. And then you've got your Jango Fett, your Quinlan Voss, and your Cad Bane. If you add the 3 of those together, which are those ping, do small points of damage type strategies, you'll see they make up almost another 25% of the meta. But between those 3 decks, they're as much as the number of Sabines that were played. After that, things drop off really quick, but one exception that I want to point out is Bossk. Bossk did very well in this event, and there were very few players, and it had 2 Bossk blue 30-point bases that made the top 8. We're going to look at the one that won the event in just a minute. Now, let's take a look at the leaders and bases and the meta that they shared. Every single Sabine leader was paired with ECL. This is showing that by far, when it comes to Sabine, ECL is the deck of choice. A lot of players like to kind of point towards what they call blonde Sabine or yellow Sabine, and I believe that there is some misconceptions about how powerful that deck is compared to the Sabine ECL, especially as you start to push into those mid-range matches or those games that push you into round 5, 6, and 7 before you can close it out, that don't have quite the same amount of power level with a yellow combination of base with Sabine, though there is a lot to be said about how explosive that deck is. Next to that is going to be Jango Tarkentown. Did a really great job. Unfortunately, No Django's made it to the top 8. Quinlan Voss, Tarkentown. It was the 7% of the meta, and one of those made it to the top 8. But again, you can see that Tarkentown, and keep going around to the edge and get the CAD, Tarkentown. Tarkentown was everywhere, and probably the second most played base in the event, or if I added them all up, you might see that Tarkentown maybe had more than Sabine ECL. Then we've got Palpatine Cunning, which is a very interesting choice. And then they've got a Palpatine Green part of that wedge. However, Palpatine Tarkentown made it in the top 8, and that's not even represented on this pie chart. It probably was a one of, which is pretty interesting. Probably part of that the rest part. The Han Green, 30 points they were saying. I know of at least 2 Han Green players that were playing ECL. And so that is a little bit of a misrepresentation there with that information. And then again, we go back to Bossk Blue, which was about 5% of the meta. I would say 5.6. Let's take a quick look back at the first slide. Bossk was about 6.4% of the meta. And Bossk Blue was about 3.6. So almost 2/3 of the Bossk players choosing to go with a blue base, 30-point basic base. And we'll see how well they did. 2 of them, again, making it to the top 8. The top 8 also included a Kira Green 30-point base, Quinlan Voss Tarkentown. There was a Palpatine Green 30 base, a Palpatine Tarkentown, and 2 Sabine ECLs, which I do want to highlight and kind of make a comparison to my own deck and see where I may have made some bad choices in the cards that I played, or if I just didn't really approach the Han ECL matchup correctly to be able to take that last game and make a top 8 appearance myself. So let's talk about the top 8. So this one finished somewhere between 5th and 8th place. I'm not sure exactly where Dylan fell in the standings. There is on the app, I could look it up, but he is just in the top 8. And some of the cards that he chose to use that are very interesting and may have given him the advantage when we come to looking at my deck is that he has 4 1-cost units in his list. And you're going to see something very similar to that with the top deck that came in 2nd place, the top Sabine deck. Dylan Beebe, congratulations to you, by the way, for making a top 8 appearance out of 111 players. That is not easy to do. It shows a very high level of skill, and there is some interesting choices he made. Some of them I agree with. Some of them at this point I now kind of maybe not so much agree with, and we're going to talk about those now. One card that I think is very good in this deck, and it's kind of taking the spot of where you would see a 2 of Heroic Sacrifice, is going to be the Daring Raid. It is a great combination card to have in your deck to go straight to the base, finish games off, and Daring Raid is not a bad choice for those turn 1 plays, especially against Quinlan Voss and Django Tarkentown or any of the decks that want to play Triple Dark Raid. As usually their first turn play is putting something in the air that has a very small body to it, but a little bit higher power. The other card that I see that's a very questionable card in this list is going to be these Rebel Sympathizers. As a 4-drop, I don't like the body. It's a 3/4. It does have the Rebel tag, though, and it is giving you Restore 2. However, we're going to see in the top deck where they made a slightly different choice to give them a little bit larger body in the defensive side of the card so that it could absorb more damage and survive in certain matchups like Han. And we also see that he has played 3 Dark Sabers, 2 in the main, 1 in the sideboard. I don't think the 3rd Dark Saber is a good choice. I stepped away from it, and the 2nd place Sabine deck that we're going to look at here in a second, you're going to see they also stepped away from the choice of having a 3rd Dark Saber and actually chose General's Blades. Another card that I have come to find to be questionable whether or not it has potential to stay in the deck list is Admiral Lauren. I do understand its position in the list. It does make vigilance-based removal spells like Takedown have to make a choice between taking it out or not being able to take out a Sabine when it deploys. And that's a tough decision, and forcing them to have 2 takedowns and really just making it very difficult for them to be able to stop Sabine from coming across the table. With that said, the rest of the choices on this deck are very streamlined with what you would see with most Sabine ECL decks. You've got your Battlefield Marines, your space units that are pretty typical. You got your Sabine ground unit, your For a Cause I Believe in. Fleet Lieutenant is always there. A 3 of Wing Leader. Almost every deck that I've seen that has done well has a 3 of for this card, with the exception of one deck that won in our Hyperdrive event. There's a video about it. Check out that last match. It was very interesting with Noah versus William. Also, Cassian Andor always makes an appearance in these decks. The Bright Hope at 2 seems to be pretty standard. Your K2SOs, very standard. The 2 Dark Sabers, almost every deck is running 2 of those. And then you got your Poen Wreckers that are rounding off the top of your curve. He did put 3 Rebel Assaults, which, not a bad choice. However, I feel like 2 is where you want to be. And the reason I say that is by taking this down to 2, it opens up the possibility of moving this Timely Reinforcements in the deck, giving you an extra ECL ability or extra ambush ability on a unit. With that said, in the sideboard, we have our typical removal for other upgrades. I don't necessarily agree with this card being put in the list. I feel like disabling Fang Fighter allows you to progress your board state while also removing that upgrade threat that your opponent may be presenting. And with the addition of Poe Dameron having that ability to remove upgrades just makes it where the casting cost being 1 on this, I understand. But I feel like if you're going to do that, then you go ahead and it kind of makes you want to lean into, especially in the mirror matches, a General's Blade over the Dark Saber, so that you can play a General's Blade plus have 1 up to get rid of their Dark Saber or their General's Blade and be able to crush in while they're sitting there looking at their upgrade in their discard pile. The Ewing Reinforcement. I want to talk about this card a little bit before I look at the next list, because you're going to see something that William Hannon out of Myrtle Beach Games did to his list, which came in 2nd place and did very well. He went 2-0 for the first 6 rounds of Swiss. And then in a video that he has, which I'm going to encourage you to check out, and there will be a link at the end of the video to his review of his performance and his deck list, he really only played the last round just to check out what the other deck was playing, get some information. And that was the only reason he played. I think he even scooped and then went and got something to eat. He's got Wolfie in there to kind of protect himself from those Bossk decks that are gaining crazy amounts of life. I'm not sold on Wolfie being the answer to that, but it does make it a little more difficult for them. And then he also has a little bit more space support here out of his sideboard, just in case he runs against some of those Triple Dark Raid style decks. So overall, a great list and great performance by Dylan Beebe. I still do question some cards in this list, especially the Rebel Sympathizers, as it kind of clutters the 4 drop slots. And there's a lot of things you want to be doing with this deck on turn 3 at 4 resources. However, he did make top 8, and I was 15th place. So have to kind of keep that in mind when I make any kind of comments about these players' performance or their deck lists. Now, let's take a look at William Hannon's finalist deck. This came in 2nd place. This deck has some really spicy choices to it. First, he's running a full 3 of R2-D2s. That is very good at allowing him to put a unit down on turn 2 and put out a R2-D2 and go like kind of wide against the decks that are doing things like Power of the Dark Side and Merciless Contest and so forth. One of the big things it has, though, is that big 4 toughness. And that makes it very difficult for Han ECL or any deck that is trying to ambush a card across the board to take Sabine's first turn play out and take it off tempo. R2-D2 survives and also puts a point of damage on their opponent and has allowed me to filter, or allowed William to filter the deck. That is a big deal, and I think when I look back at my list, which we'll take a look at in a second, that is one of the things that I could have done better. I actually had 3 R2-D2s out on the table the night before. I also had the General's Blade sitting out on the table, and I was looking at possibly going up to the 3 Sindari Peacekeepers. But I was very much trying to find a way to fit in Admiral Yularen because I felt like that was a very important card to have. But it may have been a mistake on my part, and it could have cost me. It could have cost me when it came to that Han ECL matchup where I took the third game loss and got knocked out of a potential top 8 placement. You can also see he has a second General's Blade. Now just think, you drop R2-D2 on turn 1, or you drop a Sabine on turn 1, and then you just go ahead and throw a blade on it. You don't even care. You put it on your Battlefield Marine. Don't even care. You're swinging for 6 on turn 2. That is huge. And these are all very strong plays to make, in addition to the Fleet Lieutenant, which can allow you to go in for 5. And then later on, you still got 2 Dark Sabers that are there to go onto your Sabine. So having the additional upgrades puts a lot of pressure on players that are trying to use 2 slots in their sideboard, like you can see he's done here with the Disabling Fang Fighters, using those 2 slots in the sideboard to kind of battle that, because now you've got twice as many. You're twice as likely to draw an upgrade as they are to have an answer to it, and that's a really good place to be. You can also see that William has decided in this list that he moved the Fighters for Freedom to the sideboard. I think that's a pretty good choice. I also think that you could potentially just cut the card from the deck and maybe find some other card to fall into that 3-drop slot, or a cheaper card like, say, Rebel Pathfinder, which still has Saboteur. But I believe he kept it in the list for the fact that it has Saboteur more so than the ping damage that it does to bases. Scanning Officer, an obvious lean-in against these smuggle decks. That's going to include Quillen Voss to an extent. It's going to include Han Yellow to a great extent, and also Han Green to some extent as well. You can also see that he's added in a Spec Force Soldier Repair in the sideboard, which allows him to go up to 5 units in the second game. Again, allowed him to go wide, also giving him the ability to take away Sentinels from opposing Bright Hopes and mirror matches. That's very important. But one thing I definitely noticed is that he has gone down to 1 U-Wing reinforcement. Now, I love one-ofs, but I usually love one-ofs in decks that have strong drawing capabilities built into them. Now, don't get me wrong, in his list, he has R2-D2 to filter the top of his deck. He also has Heroic Sacrifice that allows him to draw a card. And then let's not forget that the 4 cards you look at from For a Cause I Believe In can factor into digging and finding that U-Wing reinforcement. So that's not a terrible choice. But here's where I found myself, because I chose a different route when it came to the U-Wing reinforcements. I went really heavy into them. And I found myself quite often in a position where I had a Wrecker in my hand and a U-Wing reinforcement, and I was seeing a counter synergy between them. You know, to get the full value out of that Wrecker, I wanted to go down a resource, so I was either going to hold off on playing the Wrecker so I could play a U-Wing reinforcement, or I had to play the Wrecker and push my U-Wing reinforcement back 2 full turns before I could play it. And that counter synergy, I think William picked up on as well, and that's why he brought that number down to 1. Still a great card, but you're a little less likely to have it in your hand with that Wrecker if you only got 1 in the deck. You can also see that I went with an extra Bright Hope. I got the Admiral Yularans in the sideboard, and then I've also got some upgrade defense in the Disabling Fane Fighters. Me and William both choosing to use the same card there and seeing the value and the potential of that extra 3/2 body in space, and some protection against some of the Bossk or other restore decks by having Wolfie in the list. When it comes to my upgrades, I only used the 2 Dark Sabers. I also only used 2 Sundari Peacekeepers. But the real changes in this deck compared to the first place deck is right here in the middle of the 2 and 3 drops between the Rebel Pathfinder 2 of and the Fighters for Freedom 2 of. Take those 4 cards out, you now have 4 slots where you can put an additional R2. You could put an additional Centauri Peacekeeper. You could drop a General's Blade into this list and also put in the second Timely Reinforcement, though I don't think I would go to 2 Timely Reinforcements in this list. I don't really like having that extra Timely Reinforcement. I didn't find a whole lot of times where I could use it effectively, and a lot of times it got put down as a resource. So upping that to 2 is not the worst decision in the world, but it also does make it where it's a lot more likely to be in your resource pile, so you're playing it for 2 instead of 1. And when you top deck it in a game where you're at parity or there's no threats on the board on your side, it's not the card you really want to top deck. I think the worst top deck that you could have in that situation is, say, either a Rebel Assault, a Heroic Sacrifice, or a Timely Reinforcement combination of those 3 cards, or the Dark Saber, or the General's Blades, all those things that are requiring something, some unit, either in your hand or on the board to take full advantage of them. And if you draw a combination of those while you're in top deck mode, it's a lot of potential loss of tempo. Also, this is an example of the Han ECL deck that I played against in the final round. This is not the one that I played against. Unfortunately, I could not find the list directly, but this list is very, very close to the one that beat me. I don't think the Greedos were in the list, but they could have potentially been there. But what this list wants to do is it wants to, on turn 1 against Sabine, resource a card with Han Solo, go up to 3 resources, and then depending on whether you deployed to the air or you went to the ground, they're going to play an Ezra or they're going to play a Millennium Falcon. Now, if you went to the ground, which is usually where you should go with Sabine, that forces them to use their energy conversion lab to ambush into your turn 1 play, setting you back in tempo, while also keeping their unit in play. However, if your turn 1 play was R2-D2, that Ezra does not kill R2-D2, and it allows you to start taking advantage of that. You keep the tempo. You can filter more cards at the top of your list. You usually have initiative, so you could even go General's Blade, swing an R2-D2 into their unit and kill it. But I believe in the Han Green matchup, unlike the Han Yellow, you want to be the aggressor, which I know Sabine is usually the aggressive deck. However, in the Han Yellow matchups, you're more the mid-range kind of control deck in using your units and your ambush and the buffs you get from fleet lieutenants and so forth, and the Rebel Assaults, and specifically Heroic Sacrifice is a great card to slam something in, because you basically get you knock 2 cards, the one they resourced plus the unit they killed. You've traded a unit, you used a card, but then you also drew a card. So it's like a 3 for 2 in your favor. You getting 3 cards, you're getting a card out of it plus the trade of your 2 cards for theirs. So that's a pretty decent place to be, because one of the things that I found from some of the videos that I watched, Maclunky Gaming had a great video where there was a Sabine Green versus Han Yellow match, and I was listening to the commentary, and the individuals that were doing the commentary were giving a lot of insights on how to play, or how they would play the deck. and it was very interesting to hear their thoughts. I also went to Thork's channel. If you haven't checked him out, I believe he's out of Germany, if I'm not mistaken, maybe France, but he is definitely European, and he has some very interesting and very wise takes. The content's a little dry, but he definitely has great ideas, and he is someone to check out. In one of his videos that I literally was listening to in the parking lot before the event was on how to beat Han Yellow. And a lot of what he said was, you're not going to be able to outgas them because of their smuggling ability, but you will be able to, if you're drawing more cards, that's better. So try to control their board so things like Plo Koon and so forth aren't as strong against you. Now, one card in this particular Han Green ECL list that is extremely powerful is Imphy's Nest. If they resupply on turn 2, going up to 4, and then bringing themselves to 5 on turn 3, they now have the ability to use Han's ability to go to 6, deploy Han, swing in, and if they haven't used their ECL, let's just say, Fantasy Dream World, they've made it that far and not used it, they can play Imphy's Nest, bounce one of your units, ambush in, and bounce another unit, while also killing another unit. That's a 3-for-1 in that action. That's one action that has 3 effects against your opponent, and that's a huge setback. Imphy's Nest is almost, I feel like, a replacement for the lack of not having the card Cunning in this list, because it has so much potential to just knock units out of the way, put them in your opponent's hand, and take them off tempo. Plus, if you notice, this deck list that I've shown you here has kind of an old Lucky 7, they used to call it, with the U-Wing reinforcements and a bunch of really good 7-drops. And that list back in the day, it would be like 3 Han Solos, 3 Luke Skywalkers, and 3 Mace Windus. Well, Imphy's Nest, with that ambush, is kind of taking the place of Mace Windu and where it fits in. And in addition to being able to kill a unit, it also gets to bounce a unit, and that's just huge. On the sideboard part of the deck, you see the extra Bright Hope to kind of shore up the space, even though the main deck does have a really great set of space units. You see the 3 Samdari Peacekeepers and some hand removal also in that package, and the ability to steal your opponent's units and use it against them. So between the Kira and Kira's just amazing. You bring her in, she really does do a lot of work against control decks and even against Sabine, which is one of the reasons why the General Blade, the Dark Saber split is so important, because if she sees your hand and you got both, she only gets to call one and you get to play the other. Luke Skywalker being played off color, awesome. Again, goes back to that Lucky 7 kind of synergy that a deck like this had back in the day, of like set 1, and then you just play it because you have so many resources and the ability to ramp, and also use Han's ability to push even more resources down. It's not hard to put a Luke Skywalker down at 9. It happened to me, and it was really good. Not to mention that on top of that, you've got the Tech DJ combo, permanently stealing a resource from your opponent, setting them down, and pushing you up in resources. So this deck list is just a representation of the type of deck that did take me out in the final round of Swiss play. And that deck pilot, the player, unfortunately, the second place Sabine deck piloted by William Hannon had beaten him right before me. So he was a 4-2. I got a pair down to him. And even though he beat me, he still only came in 9th place. But he did get a lot of extra swag gifts put in there. Now, let's talk about some prize support. And I've got a bit of a bone to pick with Atomic Empire. William, for example, because I know him personally and work with his shop as part of the Hyperdrive event series that we do down here in the between the Charleston area, the greater Charleston area, Goose Creek, Somerville, and Latson, and then the Myrtle Beach shop, so along the coast of the Carolina. He came in second place and was awarded a finalist promo card, Tranquility, I think it is, which I looked online, and TCG players, there's some that are offered for like $1,000, but the most recent sell that I've seen is only $40. Okay, and then TCG takes their little chunk out of it, and you got to put it in. You got to ship it to. By the time you're done with it, you're like $32 that you made, right? And that's the only sell that I've seen of that card. I only saw one sell. It's not the greatest card, though I have seen it show up in some sideboards. Other than that, the $150 worth of store credit to come in second place in a 111-man event that was a minimum $30 if you signed up in advance, and was $40 if you paid day of. Okay? That is a terrible, terrible prize support. Now, I'm not saying that shops don't have the right to make money. They do. But I also did the math, and at a 60% markup, which is super low. Most shops are going to be somewhere between 70 to 100% markup when they are putting something on the shelf compared to what they paid for it themselves. Even with just a 60% markup, and I did calculate in at least $300 for judge fees, which may have been a little bit low. Could have probably put another couple $100 there, because they did have a really great judge team, and they had a lead judge and at least 2 floor judges and the tournament organizer working. And they all did a great job of keeping the event running. I have no complaints at all with Atomic Empire's staff that ran this event. They did a great job. However, when I went there and I started trying to talk with some of the people that were running the event about the prize support, the response I would get is, we didn't have anything to do with that. We don't know anything about that. We can't really speak to that. And that's great. That's fine. Whatever. I understand you guys are there to judge and run the events. But when I did the math, we were looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 43 to 45% of the event fee entry fees going to the house. And that is pretty extreme. Not saying that it is unacceptable. I still went there. However, when I signed up for this event, it was in a to be announced status when it came to the prize support. And by the time I noticed what the prize support was, it was too late for me to guarantee my money back if I backed out. And I spent about $180 for a room at La Quinta. I also spent, I don't know how much in gas to get there. There's at least 2 tanks, so you throw $40 there, so that's $80. And then the maintenance, and then, the cards themselves that you're playing. I mean, it starts to come close to $300 spent to come join your event. And you come in second place and get $150 in store credit? And if it's 100% markup on whatever I'm purchasing, then I'm only getting $75 worth of value for coming in second place. Now, look, this isn't a knock against Atomic Empire, really. It isn't. A lot of shops are doing this when it comes to these planetary qualifiers. Players need to speak up. Just like we do about the set rotation that's coming up. I'm not happy about the way that's being done. And there will be some comments about that in another video. But I did want to make sure that I made a statement about this prize support issue that we seem to have, at least in the Americas, when it comes to how these shops are paying back out to the players that are doing well, or just in general. I'm not going to pontificate on this. I just want to bring it up in hopes that the rest of the players really start to take note of this, because I was not the only one that had this discussion when I was walking around that room. Other players were starting to notice and talk about it, that this prize support was not up to the level of competition, because they were very competitive players, and it certainly did not match the amount of money that they took in versus going out. For me, it's about a 20% to the house to 25%. I feel is totally acceptable and a nice chunk of change going to the shop owners for running these events, or running any event really. Plus, on top of that, there's always peripheral sales. Bags of chips, bottle of water, pack of sleeves, a deck box, what have you, that gets sold. And when you calculate all that in, that shop made a lot of money and did not push a whole lot out to us. And let me put it this way. My prize support was so weak that I'm putting it in as giveaways. I didn't even bother with it. I was like, all right, I'll just put it in the stack. We're going to give it to other players as just freebies for coming out and joining us for Hyperdrive and saying thank you for that. So I went in and grabbed a whole bunch of Spark of Rebellion that they had and paid them like whatever the tax was on it and walked away with 7 packs of Spark of Rebellion. And that was my, prize support for coming in 15th place out of 111 players. So anyway, with that said, shops do have the right to make money. That's not my argument. And if you have an argument other than shops deserve to make money, and you want to talk about what is an acceptable percentage that a shop should be able to take from the prize support after paying judges, always got to include the judges. They're the ones that make these things happen, right? Then really put the comment down there. Tell me how wrong I am. I want to hear from you. It's important. And those kind of things always are on my mind because I am an OTPG, On the Play Games Player Network. We represent a collaborative between players and shops. And we always want to make sure there's a balance, that the shops are doing well so that the player base grows. And when the shops are doing well and the player base is growing, they both continue to do well together. Player bases grow, shops have more players to be part of their events, and they have more players to buy their products. And then the shops do well, and they're running good events, so the players want to come out to those events, and it's kind of like a little dance. You want both of them to do well. So with that said, let's take a look at the top deck, the number 1 deck that took down the Durham, North Carolina Atomic Game Planetary Qualifier, and that is the Bossk Blue 30-point base, piloted by Duncan Howard. Congratulations, Duncan, is coming in for the champion in this event that had 111 players. That is a large field that you just took down, and I can't wait to see what you do when you get into the second day of the Galactic, which you are now locked in for as part of winning this event. And I want to talk about a few of the cards that Duncan chose that I am absolutely in love with. The Fine Edition is such a great card, allowing him to play an Entrenched or Perilous Position or any of his bounty cards, Top Target. Any of those cards he can play for free after taking out one of his opponent's units. And it's just a great card to have in there and very nice to see as a one of. He also had the Bounty Hunter crew to recur back his events like Force Choke, Open Fire, Power of the Dark Side, Vigilance, Takedown, the Fell the Dragon. All those cards are great. And then let's not forget the Super Laser Blast. You can even bring that back. It's so good. And then in the sideboard, he has another one in addition to the Search Your Feelings, which I'm not the biggest fan of Search Your Feelings, just because it costs 4. You got to play it on turn 3, or you have to almost take a turn off while playing it. And that can be pretty dangerous. But he may use that in certain matchups where he's just trying to grab that Avenger instead of drawing it naturally, or find some other threat to close the game out, or he just finds himself in a position where he's really got to get a hold of a restock, or even just a client to get some more life, those kind of cards. And it just gives him like an extra 1 of everything that he has in the deck. It does take a turn usually to set that up because it does cost 4, and that's where I kind of have my problem with the card. Other than that, it's basically Magic the Gathering's Demonic Tutor. It just is 1 turn slower. You can play Demonic Tutor on 2, where you have to wait to turn 3 or later to play the Search Your Feelings. Also, the Bazine Natals. That was a card that was talked about a lot when the Provisla deck won a Planetary Qualifier in Europe. It was put in the deck as a one of in the main, and I think it also had one in the sideboard, if I'm not mistaken, which gave that deck the ability to snatch cards and manipulate their opponent's hands in those late control matchup mirror matches. You know, knock a restock out of their hand, and they're sitting there, you know, kind of crippled on that. And a lot of these decks will go with a singleton restock, so you can find that with a mill power, a vigilance, and you really can just get rid of all their ability to battle you in that mill mirror match. So this list was very good. I can't knock any of the card choices he made at all. I just don't really like the Search Your Feelings personally, but you know, this guy won it all, so I can't say anything other than congratulations, and you know, can't wait to see what you do in the Galactic. With that said, remember, we have this weekend, Grand Line Games is hosting the second event, the Turning the Corner event of the Hyperdrive series. And we are going to be putting out a video about the player board, the rewards that are going with that player board, what players can expect to get out of that event in addition to the prize support that the shop is offering. And just kind of look out for that. That should drop somewhere around Monday or Tuesday of this week, and get everybody kind of prepared for that, because that is going to be a great event. It's going to be fun, and I guarantee you this, you're going to get your money's worth. You're going to get the value out of this event that you would expect that you should get in any event that you go to at a shop. That's the way we're setting things up. You know, we're setting them up for players to get rewarded for being a part of the Star Wars Unlimited community and coming out to our events. And that player board and everything's going to be reviewed come Monday or Tuesday in that video. So be looking out for that if you're interested in being a part of that event series. I know there were some people that I was talking to this weekend up at the Planetary Qualifier. I talked this thing up a lot, and there are some players that I met there for the first time that I heard may come out to one of our Hyperdrive events. I don't know if it's going to be this weekend's one at Grand Line or one of the future ones we have coming up, but I can't wait to see you guys again. It was a really good time up at the Planetary Qualifier. Lots of laughs, lots of good times, lots of fist bumps and handshakes and that kind of stuff. I just had a great time out there. I'm going to have a great time no matter where I go. That's just the kind of person I am. But with that said, this is On the Play Games signing out for you. And whether it's day or night, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.